Hello and welcome to The Briefing, a weekly conversation with leaders and experts to explore the ideas shaping our democracy today. I'm Michael Waldman, president of the Brennan Center for Justice. In recent years, in 2024 and 2025, despite all the pressure, elections were safe and secure, and that is largely due to the efforts of election officials all over the country. As they've been increasingly thrust into the spotlight, their jobs have become more challenging. They continue to face threats of violence and political interference, and at the same time, the support they usually get from the federal government has been largely withdrawn. There is a lot going on, and what they're working on right now is going to be at the center of the question of whether we have a free and fair election in 2026. I want to talk about this, what we've learned from the election officials, and much more with a really wonderful colleague of mine who is here with us today, who has come up from Washington, D.C. Liz Howard is Director of Partner Engagements, a leader in our elections and government team, and a former top election official herself, who is our ambassador to that community of unsung heroes. Welcome, Liz.
Good morning, Michael. Great to be here.
So my first question, people will want to know this because most people really didn't think about the existence of election officials until quite recently, and possibly that may be how election officials would have liked it. How did you get into this line of work? How did you come to this as the way to work for voting rights?
So I was at a small firm that did only political law. And working on post-election disputes, recounts particularly, was something that I loved, and would, run down the hallway, excited that the recount was coming and that I was going to be able to work on it. It was fantastic. And so then I had an opportunity to go work at Rock the Vote, and then Governor McAuliffe won the election in Virginia. And the man who he selected to be commissioner, Edgardo Cortez, had been an election official in Fairfax County, who I had, in Edgardo's words, sued multiple times. But, we had a great relationship, and I had worked for Governor McAuliffe. I was at the law firm that represented him. And so then I got the opportunity to go serve as the deputy commissioner of elections in Virginia, which was absolutely an amazing experience for so many reasons, including, I think most importantly for me on a personal level, was that, coming from this law firm, practicing election law for multiple years, I thought I knew everything. But really, when I got to that position, I quickly learned election administration was a huge beast, and all these things that I thought were so simple actually were not. It's every piece of the process can impact the rest of the process and can impact the voter. And it requires a special skill set to be able to understand that process and foresee some of the challenges that can come when you are making changes to that process along the way.
And especially because we have this decentralized system of running elections in this country, it requires lots of fixing and updating all along the way. And there's no central office where someone writes a memo or pushes a button and gets it all done. We saw this after the recount in Florida in 2000. There was a wholesale remake of how we ran elections with machines. We've seen it now after 2020. Do the election officials talk to each other in different places?
Increasingly so. However, this is a big change. There is one national organization called Election Center, which is the association of local election officials across the country, and they've been in existence for multiple decades. And they've been a helper to help create the infrastructure that allows election officials to talk to each other, so they can identify best practices and best approaches and how to navigate various challenges. But that infrastructure building has increased significantly, and a lot of other organizations are coming in to fill different gaps.
And who, again, this has been something that for many people is not something they think about much, except they assume that it's going to work. They rely on it. They rely on the fairness. They rely on the accuracy. Who are the election officials? I think it's an interest, as I've come to understand it through your work and the work we all do, it's actually an interesting, almost sociological thing of who these people are.
Yeah, I mean, election officials typically do their job very well. And so in some ways, they can be their own worst enemy because millions of Americans go to vote and have no problem. They breeze in and breeze out of their polling place. And that's very good for our democracy. But one of the potential downsides is that these voters don't have an appreciation or an idea about all the work that it took to get you the correct ballot that has everything that you have the right to vote for on your ballot, to make sure that it's cast correctly, to make sure that it's tabulated correctly, and to make sure that the total vote count is appropriately certified. So much work goes into this. But the typical local election official is a 50 to 64-year-old woman who makes about $50,000 a year.
So these are not the glamour jobs.
No, absolutely not. No one is an election official for the money. In fact, about 80% of our election officials are women. And this is likely a legacy of the fact that this job has historically been very administrative or perhaps secretarial, right? Like you were processing forms, you're ordering ballots, or tabulating ballots, right? However, over the past couple of decades, this job, our elections and the election official's job, has grown increasingly complex.
More technological, more threats, more pressure. But these are sort of pillars of the community.
Absolutely.
These are people you would recognize in church on Sunday morning or walking down the street of a town.
Yeah.
These are not strangers from somewhere else. That's one of the reasons we keep finding over and over again that election officials are among the most credible voices when people have doubts or have conspiracy theories about what's really going on. The best answer is very often the election officials themselves.
100%. They are your community members. They're your neighbors. You see them in church. A lot of them recruit from church to help get poll workers to serve on election day. They recruit their family members. These people are out in the community working to make it better however they can. And that's not just limited to their job.
So now this community, these people are under threat, as we said at the start. It started a lot of it in 2020, and a lot of it was, it seemed to me, because of the upheaval of COVID and just the fact that all of a sudden how everyone voted changed so dramatically. But of course, there were conspiracy theories, social media, the internet, and the increasingly outlandish false claims from Donald Trump when he was defeated, and then everything that happened after that. And we have been working at the Brennan Center with this community of people a lot. One of the things we have wanted to do was, in a rigorous way, as much as we could, really understand what is going on and what they're experiencing, both subjectively and objectively, both what's happening, but also how they're seeing it. And we do a survey regularly that we've just released, and that you've been one of the minds behind. And so tell us about the survey. Who is the survey a survey of?
Well, when we release the survey, I call it the most wonderful time of the year. I'm always so excited to learn and hear from the election officials about what they are actually experiencing. And as you mentioned earlier, we have a very decentralized system. So there's no single national database that keeps track of these election officials, that keeps track of the challenges and the constraints that they're facing, like what is actually happening on the ground. So this survey, we think, fills a really, really important gap so that we can all have a better understanding of what is actually going on out there by these, what are the stewards of our democracy, the face of the democracy in the communities across the country facing. And so we just came out with our 2026 survey earlier this week. 5 big takeaways. So the first one isn't going to be surprising, right? In the wake of the withdrawal of federal support for election security, our election officials are telling us that they need more support from the government for election security and election administration.
And to put the context here, the federal government was helping with money and with in-kind support of security experts and others, and this has basically been withdrawn. Is that right?
Correct. So, for instance, in the last administration, there were regional representatives of CISA, so the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is the main agency of the federal government that provided these support services directly to the local election officials. So these regional reps were experts in the services that the government provided and could help translate that to what that means. What does Green Bay need, right, from the list of services at the federal government offices? And those positions were just some of the positions that are at least no longer filled right now, and making it more and more difficult for election officials to access these really critical services.
And they're feeling this. So the first takeaway is that they see the loss in support, and they're not getting it from anywhere else.
Correct. 75% of local election officials said that the state and local government had not filled the gap created by the withdrawal of federal support.
So that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is about the preparation that they're doing to make sure that things go right. What did you learn in terms of how people are getting ready this year, and how would that differ from another year?
Well, some people think that election officials just work one day a year, every 2 years when there's a big election, but that's incorrect. Election officials are working on an ongoing basis around the year to prepare for the next election and to finish up the last election. So this year, just like they do typically do ahead of all the other elections, they are preparing, and this preparation includes preparing for potential disruption. This year, we saw that 71% of our local election officials have prepared for some sort of potential federal interference. So such as changes to policy at the United States Postal Service, or potentially requests for access to voting equipment or voter data.
The kind of thing that the Justice Department and the FBI have been threatening to do, and I assume also potential Supreme Court cases. If the Supreme Court basically says you cannot count ballots after Election Day, that will, in a lot of places, be a big change.
100%. These scenarios are things that unfortunately we are starting to actually see on the ground.
So in 2020, the chaos came from COVID, and in 2026, the chaos could come from Washington.
Very possible.
So the other thing that is on their minds from our survey, and it's not really a surprise, are the threats and the threats of violence and the abuse that is now being hurled routinely toward them. How are they experiencing that?
So the threats that the election officials continue to face are actually the real impetus behind us doing this survey. So after the 2020 election, we heard from election officials across the country that they were being threatened. And there was absolutely a sense of shame with this. They were unaware that this was a national problem.
That wasn't just them.
Right, exactly.
I got these messages on my phone.
They are community members. They care about their job. They care about doing their job well. And here they are. People are saying that they have not done their job well. And that alone was very disheartening. It really took a number.
You hear that from people.
Absolutely. So after that, we knew that this was happening across the country. So we brought many of them together. And of course, we're still in COVID at this time. So we did these virtual meetings, and you could just see the fact that they were in a big room, a big virtual room, and they were not alone, had such a big impact. But of course, right, like we don't have a national database, so nobody was keeping track of how many threats the election officials were receiving. So that was the real, a big reason why we launched the local election survey after the 2020 election, just to get a handle on how big of a problem this was.
And have the numbers changed much? I know it's hard to do a apples to apples comparison, but does it seem like now part of the lot in life that an election official has, or is the threat level rising?
It seems like the threats continue about at the same pace. But I will say this, right? When I was an election official, which was 2014 through 2018, I made multiple unpopular decisions. I was a part of a leadership team that made multiple unpopular decisions. But I don't remember anyone ever threatening to kill me. I don't remember anyone ever threatening to kill my family. And that is what we have seen. That is what election officials have faced ever since 2020. And since we've been, distributing this survey.
That's very powerful. And interestingly, the final finding is probably one we wouldn't have even thought about 10 years ago, which is AI, and how it is changing the disinformation environment, but also how election officials are looking to use it, like everybody else, trying to figure out what is this something they can actually use. What did you hear about AI from the election officials?
Well, AI is a tool and a weapon. In this profession, right, which big picture, you have these amazing local election officials who are critically underfunded and under-resourced and perpetually trying to do more with less, because again, they're the ones who have to face the voter and help eligible Americans register and cast their ballot. So these tools hold some promise for them. And we have seen an increase, a market increase in the percentage of election officials who are starting to play around with this. When we first asked about this back in 2024, 5% of election officials said that they were using AI, right? So we're at 16% this year, right? So
I bet it'll be a lot more next year.
exactly, 100%. Right. What they're reporting that they're using AI for are helping to draft social media posts, right? Helping to draft media plans, things that are not necessarily voter facing. But I think one of the, I consider this one of the happy points of my portfolio because there is such promise here. However, election officials and we recognize that there are serious concerns with the use of this technology.
Well, you don't want it hallucinating. You don't want it doing the analysis of who won the election and people don't trust it or
Correct.
It
Correct.
makes stuff up.
Right. And election officials know that they are in the spotlight right now and subject to such scrutiny that if they make any mistakes or if the technology that they rely on makes any mistakes, that can really have huge negative consequences for the election official, for the jurisdiction, and for the election.
One of the things, as we know, President Trump says the system is rigged and on and on and on. One of the things he has continued to demand is that there be paper ballots. But one of the ways in which our system actually has been strengthened is there are paper ballots basically everywhere. And that is, in fact, pretty important to enabling election officials to do recounts, all the things he used to sue about, to do what we all call risk limiting audits to make sure it all worked well. And I bet AI will help with that kind of thing. It actually is one of the elements of the system that is much improved. One of the lessons of the last quarter century since the crazy Florida recount is actually things can get better and have gotten better. And it's really now much more secure than it was. And that is one more reason why the worries about our elections are so off base. Let's talk about between now, the more or less 6 months that are happening between now and the election in November, the very important midterm election. What do you think is needed to be done to help these election officials? Again, groups like the Brennan Center and other nonprofit groups across the political spectrum we work with, our street, we work with all different kinds of groups. We're all working now in ways probably we're not on anybody's anticipated list of how to be a voting rights crusader, to be helping the basics happen. One of the things, as you said, is that the federal election security operation was basically purged. People are stepping in on the outside to help respond to that. What are some of the ways that people are dealing with that?
So a couple of things, one of which that we work with closely is the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. So this is an organization with current and former law enforcement and current and former election officials. So this group is a diverse partisan, has a diverse partisan makeup, and they're, conservative Republicans and they're very liberal Democrats who are part of this organization. But they focus on what they agree on, which is that it is unacceptable to threaten our election officials and to threaten our elections. And so this group goes out across the country and works directly with the local officials and the local law enforcement on the ground. One of the things they do are tabletop exercises. So these are crisis scenario exercises where
people role play almost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you've ever done a fire drill before, right? That is a type of tabletop exercise, right? So you're an expert.
Yeah.
But the election officials and the law enforcement exercise scenarios such as, what if there's a report of a shooter at a polling location? And every state has different rules. So in some states, there are law enforcement that are required to be there in uniform. And some states, law enforcement aren't allowed to come within a certain number of feet of the polling location unless 2 poll workers call and report an incident that is necessary for them to access the polls.
And one of the things that we found that's so interesting is these election workers, these election officials, made really clear what they wanted was help from law enforcement, and they weren't getting it. And so this network of sheriffs and police and prosecutors working with the election officials has been really important and has really become an institution in many states. My understanding is there are going to be 100 plus such trainings or scenario planning exercises or whatever over the course of the next year. And I have no doubt there will be many more. One of the things that is so striking to me is that in all 50 states, beat cops on Election Day were carrying pocket guides. And I see you have some here. You can hold one up so that the people at home can see them. And these are not notional pocket guides. They're actual things printed on little square papers on how to protect the election, what to do, what not to do. I think how many copies were printed for the 2024 election?
100,000 in paper, and many more were distributed electronically.
And this is not something that existed before. And again, it was, a lot of people say, well, is it really the case that police at the polls is what you want to have on Election Day? Doesn't that scare people away? But actually, when there's threats of violence, it can actually be pretty important in giving people confidence.
Absolutely, right? And, we know that law enforcement is going to be called to come to the polls. So with our work with the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, right, we push to have the local election official and the law enforcement meet, discuss, right? What are the past challenges that have happened in that jurisdiction? What are the expectations? We found that law enforcement really care about their local election official, and they want to be a good partner to them to the greatest extent that they can. So in the event that if they get a 911 call on Election Day, and in their 911 system, it is flagged as a polling location, right? The law enforcement can come in their car without the lights on. In some jurisdictions, they might be able to send plain clothed law enforcement to respond to these concerns. But the best way to get to that point, right, where you are keeping the voters front of mind, is for the election official and the law enforcement to meet and discuss these things ahead of time. And this poll in particular, I think one of the happy points for me was that you saw 80% of election officials said that they are planning to coordinate with law enforcement ahead of the 2026 election to help keep our elections safe.
And these are often people in the same communities that they're in.
Yes.
And that, again, creates the reality of a robust, hardened election system.
Yes.
The goal is that, I'm sure lots of people think, well, wait a minute, I voted in 2024. It was very calm. It was a big nothing. That didn't just happen, but that's the goal.
Right, exactly.
They should the least newsworthy thing on Election Day should be how hard it was to vote. And if people have the chance to vote, they will make their voices heard. I'll mention, we've talked about this, numerous other threats that we're getting ready for. We're of course very involved in the demands by the Justice Department to states for voter records, for these sensitive private voter records, that it's unlawful. They don't have the right to demand that stuff. States are standing up. We now see the FBI, very politicized, being used to do raids on election offices, which seem designed, at least in part, to kind of rattle the cage and scare people in other jurisdictions to keep everyone on edge. And we're all being ready. We're working to get ready for the thing that has not happened yet, which is the potential for the use of troops, of ICE, of CBP, of the National Guard. As Steve Bannon says, we should surround the polls with ICE. And we have made the point that, first of all, this is quite illegal, and we're helping make sure that election officials and state officials know what the laws are. But this is something where it can't only be dependent upon court rulings. I do think courts will rule quickly. We need to let courts know they need to rule quickly. But this is something where citizens are going to have to be involved, with business community, clergy, and the League of Women Voters is planning on mobilizing tens of thousands of people all over the country to be doing, in effect, what was done in Minnesota, where neighbors help neighbors. And that's, again, probably not something that election officials have had to think about much before, but it's to make it a civic cause to have calm and safe and secure elections. It's going to be an interesting 6 months.
Very interesting. And election officials are hearing from these community groups in a lot of good ways. The community groups are asking what would be helpful, or, are telling the election officials that they're organizing these efforts so that these people will be at the polls so that they can help document any violations of law and help be part of the pushback to resist these illegal efforts. But, we think that election officials need to really lean into their relationships with their local county council. I mentioned earlier that 80% of election officials said that they were planning to work with law enforcement. Only 34% said that they're planning to work with local county council. I think there's a lot of room for improvement there, and whether the local county council, who have really avoided the spotlight over the past several years because the big threats facing our elections, threats against election officials, were primarily the responsibility of law enforcement. Foreign interference, right, was largely the responsibility of the IT folks. Now I think the local lawyers are going to face the spotlight, and the election officials need them.
That's really good to know. And another thing where the Brennan Center is helping out when we can. Last question for you. Whenever I hear about you, you're on the road somewhere. How much travel do you do, and where in the country do you think we should be looking at?
So I do travel quite a bit. I'm at an event at least once a month, but typically multiple events once a month. If the election officials are working, then I feel honored and lucky to have an opportunity to work with them. So I'm there. I think that it's so hard to pick a place. I've worked for politicians and parties before, and they always ask the same question. Where are the hot spots going to be?
What 3 states do I need to worry about?
Right. I mean, concerns about North Carolina. I'm concerned about Arizona always, and Michigan has so many elections this year. They just selected the Republican slate for their statewides, and it looks like it's going to be close elections up and down the ballot up there. And they have the second highest number of election officials in the country. They have about 1,600. They have an interesting system where they have a county election official, but the administration is largely done at the municipal or township level. Lots of moving pieces, lots of incredible election officials, lots of stress is going to come down on that system.
Well, we're grateful to you for being our eyes and ears, for being so important to that community of people, for putting yourself into it with every bit of what you can do. It makes a big difference. We're grateful, and thank you for being part of this and for being part of this conversation. I want to again thank my colleague Liz Howard. This is a taste of the intense work that is going to be going on between now and Election Day and beyond. Again, the goal is not lots of excitement and lots of drama at the polls. The goal is that the voters have their say. The goal is that we say once again, oh, that actually turned out to be fine. That would be a very nice outcome, and very much what we are aiming for. But it doesn't just happen. It doesn't happen automatically. Lots of people all over the country, election officials, law enforcement, county council, and national civic, business, clergy, military veteran, and other groups are going to have to work together to make it happen. We will keep you apprised of it all as the political stakes get higher and as the noise gets louder. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe at the links on the platforms where one subscribes to podcasts. Please give us 5 stars if you are so inclined. And above all else, please let your friends and community know about this briefing podcast. It's important to get the word out about democracy in America in 2026. Thanks so much.